By the early 20th century, European diplomats shared a running joke about the state of the Ottoman Empire. They called it the sick man of Europe, a fragile state on geopolitical life support, openly mocked by the foreign powers it once commanded. The empire was in a state of territorial freefall. Throughout the 1800s, the Ottomans lost their grip on vast provinces across the Mediterranean and the Middle East, with their borders receding toward Anatolia in a humiliating retreat. 4 centuries earlier, the Ottomans fielded the most lethal military force on the planet. At its peak, this war machine swallowed Constantinople and stretched its dominion across 3 continents. It was a force that dictated terms to kings and emperors alike. This raises a central mystery. How does a 600-year superpower go from dictating the fate of Europe to being carved up by it? The story of the Ottoman collapse is a study in how a dominant military power allows itself to degrade into easy prey. The empire began as a small regional power in 1299. Led by Osman I, the Ottomans capitalized on the internal disarray of neighboring Christian kingdoms, systematically picking apart the decaying Byzantine state. To sustain their expansion, they built Europe's first modern standing army. These were the Janissaries, elite infantrymen taken from conquered territories, converted to Islam, and trained to be fiercely loyal to the Sultan. They paired this discipline with an early mastery of gunpowder. While their rivals relied on traditional cavalry, the Ottomans fielded ranks of musket-wielding troops and devastating heavy cannons. That combination of professional infantry and heavy artillery reached its climax in 1453. Mehmed the Conqueror battered down the walls of Constantinople, capturing a strategic prize that had eluded invading armies for 1,000 years. The conquests reached their limit in the 1500s under Suleiman the Magnificent. He pushed the borders to their geographic maximum while codifying the legal system and enforcing a degree of religious tolerance that attracted foreign talent to his court. Ottoman growth was driven by an aggressive willingness to innovate, filling the geopolitical vacuum between East and West with a more efficient state structure. By the 1600s, that momentum flatlined. The borders stopped expanding, and an empire built for conquest found itself forced into a defensive crouch. Without new territories to plunder, internal decay set in. Sultans retreated into the secluded luxury of their palaces, abandoning the battlefield and allowing their highly centralized government to splinter among rival advisors. Even the Janissaries became a liability. The elite infantry devolved into a corrupt political faction of kingmakers, protecting their privileges by rebelling against and even assassinating reform-minded sultans, like the 14-year-old Osman II. While the Ottomans fought each other in the capital, their European rivals modernized. The military tactics and technologies that the Turks had once pioneered were surpassed by rising powers in the West. This map highlights the definitive turning point. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz forced the Ottomans to hand over massive swaths of the Balkans to the Austrian Habsburgs. It was their first major territorial loss in Europe. The institutions that built Ottoman dominance, from the absolute authority of the Sultan to the elite ranks of the Janissaries, had become the anchors guaranteeing its stagnation. By the 1800s, the empire was bleeding territory. A surge of local nationalism ripped away provinces across the Balkans, Egypt, and North Africa. Leadership attempted to force modernization onto the state to stop the rot. They pushed through the European-inspired Tanzimat reforms, a process that ultimately led to the Young Turk Revolution to reinstate a constitution. These reforms couldn't secure the borders. Instead, the Ottomans survived by playing a game of diplomatic manipulation, pitting rivals like Britain and Russia against one another so no single nation could grow bold enough to destroy them. That balancing act ended with a fatal miscalculation. Entering World War I, the Ottoman military government locked the state into a binding alliance with Germany. Despite staging fierce defensive stands, most notably at Gallipoli, the Turkish forces were outmatched. The Allies hammered the fragile empire from every possible direction. By relying on diplomatic gambling rather than structural power, the empire ensured that a single wrong move on the global stage would result in its total destruction. The end arrived in October 1918. Following the Armistice of Mudros, Allied forces marched into Constantinople, occupying the Ottoman capital and stripping the dynasty of its autonomy. The 1920 Treaty of Sevres acted as a legal blueprint for dismemberment, intended to strip the dynasty of its remaining authority. Looking at this map, the destruction was absolute. the heartland of Anatolia was fractured into distinct zones, handed off to Greece, France, Italy, and Britain. But that partition was never fully realized. Outraged by the terms, Turkish nationalists rejected the European occupation, sparking the Turkish War of Independence. During the chaos, the revolutionaries made a permanent break from the past. In 1922, the 600-year Ottoman Sultanate was abolished, and the final sultan was sent into exile. Under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal, the nationalists drove the occupying forces out of Anatolia. By summer 1923, they achieved international recognition for a modern state, the Republic of Turkey. It took over a century for the sick man of Europe to finally expire. Early innovation and calculated aggression can build a superpower, but an inability to cure internal rot will reduce even the greatest empires to history.